Hey there, John Bush here with the Live Free Now show, bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. And today I want to talk to you about why I am optimistic about the prospects for liberty in the future, in spite of all of the craziness going on and the tyranny and all this crazy COVID stuff. I'm actually very hopeful that we are doing a good job promoting the cause of freedom. People are waking up to the treachery and deception that's taking place. And as governments and tyrants try to put the squeeze more on people, there's this counter reaction that takes place where people are standing up and pushing back even more. And here we have someone, Awakened World, from the UK that's chiming in all across the globe. Thank you so much for tuning in. There's actually rallies and protests. This is one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. There's rallies and protests taking place globally against the lockdowns, against the mask mandates, against the gates, the vaccine agenda, all that stuff. There's one taking place in London right now. There's one taking place in New Zealand right now as we speak. And of course, things have been popping off all across the country. Just recently, there was a giant mass protest in Germany. And that protest, the government reported that there was 10 to 20,000 people, but there's other sources saying that there was 1 million people. Huge mass protest. And the media had the audacity to say that it was right-wingers and Nazis. That must be really offensive to people that had family, or they themselves lived through World War II and the Holocaust and stuff, to be labeled Nazis for simply standing up for their freedoms. But the protest was huge. There's a documentary that Derek Bros posted on the Conscious Resistance Network. Somebody shared it with him, and it really goes into nitty-gritty details about the protest. Somebody produced it, shared it with him. The cops came and tried to shut it down. Well, they did have them turn off the loudspeakers and stuff. But here's the point. The people of the country, not just conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and right-wingers, but a significant segment of the population are seeing through what's taking place right now. The agenda. What are they seeing through? There's more and more people that are becoming aware of the fact that there's a small group of people that has, in large part, taken control over many of the major institutions in society, whether it's academia, media, entertainment, science, government especially, healthcare. And this small group of people has plans, and they're carrying out those plans, to further centralize power in the hands of a very small amount of people and to institute a form of technocracy whereby government, the management of resources, the management of economies, ultimately the management of people, isn't carried out through self-determination, even through representative democracy, which as a voluntarist, I'm not personally a fan of, but it would certainly be preferable to technocracy. No, rather it's going to be carried out by intellectual elites and artificial intelligence and smart cities, smart grids, so on and so forth. Okay, so this plan has been in the works for quite some time. And I myself have been researching. Oh, lost there for a second. And so when all this COVID stuff started, at first I was a little bit skeptical, but I wanted to try to keep an open mind to see how things would pan out. But it wasn't very long before I started to see, okay, I've seen this before. After 9/11, the very same game was played out. Ramp up the fear, sensationalize the facts, distort, misinform, label those who speak out against the narrative as conspiracy theorists, kooks, threats, dangerous people, and then institute a whole series of controls. And because everyone is so afraid, there's going to be a ton of people that don't resist, that don't question it, that obediently obey. And we see this exact same phenomenon taking place with COVID-19. And like I said early on, I was like, okay, pandemic. I watched some documentaries on the 1918 Spanish flu, and it's like, I hope this doesn't turn out to be like that. And then anyone with a semblance of critical thinking can quickly see through the narrative that the tests are bogus, that the numbers are inflated. You got people dying from a motorcycle accident in Florida that are being included in the COVID-19 numbers. And so then on top of that, not only could I see through it, but I started to see, oh, this is the program that's being played out. And it's many of the very same characters that are involved in the program. It's the same cast of characters that we have seen with previous tyrannies, previous ramping up of the technocratic agenda of the social engineering. And one of those, it's always like them, they, the powers that be, but it's like this ephemeral entity or this like this metaphysical idea, but in reality there's actual individual actors. And one of the institutions that I can always point to that is in large part responsible for a lot of the chicanery and treachery and deception is the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller family. Even though David Rockefeller passed, the institution lives on. And it's a lesson for we liberty lovers and freedom thinkers that the enemies of liberty, the technocrats, the social engineers, the globalists, they have a multi-generational view and strategy. They're not in it for short-term wins. They are in it for long-term change. And they have been at it for quite some time. And the Rockefeller Foundation in large part is responsible for the advent of monocropping and the type of agriculture that we see that completely depleted resources from the soil, the healthy balance that was in the soil, that gave rise to an entire industry of pesticides and chemicals and Monsantos. They also, the Rockefeller Foundation, had a large part in the shifting away from Eastern, natural, integrative, holistic medicine towards Western allopathic medicine. They funded and financed the medical schools shifting towards that Western world. And they also are playing a large part in global health and how this pandemic is being played out. So there's a lot of bad stuff going on. There are lockdowns that are crippling, decimating economies. A lot of the people that favor the lockdowns, I suspect, are either on the government dole through the unemployment, or they have a typical employment job, or they work from home. It's a completely different mindset if you have spent your entire life savings, invested in a business 10, 20, 30 years, and now that's all being taken away. Your life's work being taken down by these bureaucrats. So we have the lockdowns taking place. We have these ridiculous mask mandates where even in the heat of summer, people are required to put a mask, recirculate their own CO2, given the false sense of security that this is actually helping. Maybe even if it helps this much, I don't think that it's stopping anything, especially when you consider that the virus can be aerosolized and floating all around. And there's viruses all around us all the time, including in our body. Many people don't know that over half of the cells in your body aren't even human cells, and not even your own cells, right? There's a whole lot of virus and bacteria. So we got the mask mandate. We have thermal drones flying around detecting whether there's social distancing going on. We have mayor of LA shutting down electricity. We have the soon to be rollout of a mass vaccination campaign where even President Donald Trump has stated that he will use the military in order to help roll it out. We have legal theorists, state governments, entire countries already priming the pump for the vaccine to be mandatory, or if it's not mandatory in the traditional sense, as in we'll put you in a cage or we'll physically hold you down, it's mandatory in the sense that if you don't get the vaccine, we're going to withhold privileges. All of this is taking place, right? So someone that would just examine that stuff on the surface would be like, wow, we're really screwed. If we appreciate liberty and freedom, we're toast. We're failing. This is over. But I'm a big fan of the law of attraction, right? And where focus goes, energy flows. So if that's all you focus on, if you're just like spending a bunch of time online or watching mainstream media or watching guys like Alex Jones, although he does mix some optimism in some time and actually get out from behind the microphone stand. But there's a lot of pundits and folks that are in the line of conspiratorial view of history that just really focus on the problem. If that's all you do, then sure, it would seem like we're totally screwed. We've lost the battle for freedom, right? But if you shift your focus and you focus on the beautiful things that are taking place in this world, you focus on the fact that in spite a concerted propaganda campaign, not only with COVID, but a consistent propaganda campaign with public schools taking away people's critical thinking skills, with this whole social engineering that has led so many people to not have faith in their own rational faculties or in their own intuition, and to rather abrogate responsibility for discernment to external authorities, be they public school teachers, doctors, political experts, health experts, right? In spite of generations of social engineering, people are seeing through the veil. People are seeing through the government and the public health experts' veil of legitimacy. And not only are they seeing reality for what it is, seeing through the narrative, but they're standing up, and they're standing up in mass. From individual examples of peaceful non-resistance and non-compliance, people going into the store without the mask, saying it's a medical exemption. My friends out in California, like David Rodriguez, that have been consistently holding these bonfires on the beach in California, even though it's illegal to do so. And when the cops come up, they politely talk to them about voluntarism and coercion. Not only is it these individual acts, even, resistance. I was watching Derek Bros talk about a video recently where he pointed out resistance isn't necessarily taking up arms against the government per se. Resistance is having children and not vaccinating them. Resistance is getting a considerable amount of your food from a local community farm or growing it on your own. Resistance is sharing skills with one another and learning to be self-sufficient. So it's taking place on an individual level. It's also taking place in mass. For example, we just went down to the Barton Springs Freeside. The Barton Springs is a pool here in Austin, beautiful spring-fed pool, closed down because of COVID. Absolutely ridiculous. There's a little Freeside where the water spills over and it starts a creek that goes into Lake Austin. I'm not going to call it Lady Bird Lake for you Austinites. And that was closed too. And there's like little fence put up blocking you. And even and then there's all these little hike and bike trails through the greenbelt of Austin, beautiful place. And the city bureaucrats expect you to get a reservation and to wear a mask when you're coming to these trails. Well, we went down there recently, a bunch of other people. Alex Jones called a bunch of people in, just general freedom lovers came in, and we went swimming. And that was considered an act of rebellion, interestingly enough. And also there was massive pushback. The video I shared of this event went totally viral, and a lot of people absolutely loved it and felt inspired by it. But there was a significant number of people that are like, oh my God, you're going to kill us. These are super spreaders. You're going to be sick in 2 weeks, so on and so forth. But people are defying the mandates and orders. And we saw a huge round of anti-lockdown protests in the United States, even like in Michigan, or I forget what state it was. I think it was Michigan. People showed up armed to the teeth. Militia members showed up. They stormed the Capitol building. All across the country, there was a wave of anti-lockdown protests. Then there still has been a wave of anti-mask protests. Now, this has also been taking place globally. 1 million people marching in Germany, people marching in New Zealand right now. New Zealand and Australia have some hardcore tyranny where law enforcement officials can enter your home without warrant if they suspect that you're COVID positive and not quarantining. That kind of thing's happening in the US as well, with ankle bracelets being placed on people to monitor them. We got Great Britain throwing it down right now. Not only that, but I early on in my activism career realized that political activism alone isn't going to save us. Not a big fan of political activism. However, when people are doing effective political activism, like legalizing marijuana, for example, I think that's a good thing. Or putting restraints on government's ability to surveil police states, so on and so forth. But political activism alone is not sufficient in order to bring about the free society that we all deserve. What is necessary, in my opinion, is the creation of the alternative institutions that one day will replace the state as a means of providing goods and services to human beings, common defense, justice, and as a means of overall organization of society. So if we just focus on politics in that little realm, then we're going to be constantly reactionary. It's the system that's a problem, not who's in control of it. Even if libertarians, for example, or the Libertarian Party were to take power, there would still be a massive the existence of a massive institution that utilizes coercion in order to control people against their wishes, right? There is a lot of people that are building and furthering these alternative institutions. Cryptocurrency is just one great example of all of this. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is an example of a decentralized, anarchical, in that there's no hierarchy, institution that spans across the entire globe, and without a government, without a central authority, corporation, business, organizing committee. This cryptocurrency has managed to create the ability for individuals to exchange value, to send smart contracts, to keep records that is immutable, cannot be taken away, cannot be changed. It's a wonderful example. We have mutual aid groups springing up all across the country in response to disasters like hurricanes, in response to lockdowns and COVID, and even some left-leaning mutual aid groups that are helping people that are genuinely concerned with COVID. These are all beautiful things. We have the Freedom Cell Network, a network of small groups of around 8 people that are organizing to achieve common goals, to provide for mutual aid and mutual defense. These small groups of 8 are working together with other small groups of 8 to collaborate and create a larger network. And the Freedom Cell Network, which was an idea that was birthed in 2014, since then has grown to over 3,500 participants. Now, these are people that are of like mind, if you're watching this video, that are tired of complaining, tired of internet forums, tired of politics, and they are taking it upon themselves to create the institution necessary to provide for their security, common defense, justice, services, wants, needs, and to organize themselves. It's all taking place right now in spite of the growth of the technocracy. You see, I have a default optimism for the future prospects of liberty for a couple of reasons. Number one, our natural order, our natural essence as human beings is one of freedom, of free will. And life forms in general, their purpose is to survive, to live, and procreate. That's just the natural default order. Another thing is that truth is the natural default order. Universal truths, laws of physics, right? These are the default. It's almost as though there is a code, or there really is a code, right? Even in our DNA, but like a program. And what the technocrats, what the powers that be, or powers that wish they were, or the parasitic class, as Derek Rose says, I like that term, I'm going to start using that more, parasite class. What these globalists, these evildoers, they, in order to carry out their goals, they have to use deception and treachery. They have to distort the truth. They have to manipulate people into going along with their agenda, because if they sold it to them for what it was, take sustainable development and Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, for example. If they sold it to them for what it was, hey, we're with the United Nations and we are here to herd humans into compact megacities where they are more easily controlled. We intend to section off entire parts of the Earth's surface so that there's no human access. And on top of that, because we believe that the optimal number of human beings on this Earth in order for us to have sustainable living is probably about 1 billion or 85% less than what it is. So we are going to utilize eugenics and population reduction methods in order to reach that state, or we're going to have everyone live as serfs. These are actual things that they've said in their Agenda 21 documents in the Global Biodiversity Assessment, which is like the blueprint for Agenda 21. So if they were to come out and just sell people on that plan, those ends, then they wouldn't go for it, right? Instead, they say, we are experiencing a cataclysmic change of the climate that will in turn lead to the Earth's oceans rising, tides, coastal cities disappearing. We have a lack of equity in this world. We need to utilize government in order to lower carbon output from humans and industry. And we're going to create this peachy, beautiful, chipper utopia where everyone frolics together, everyone is on an egalitarian, equal playing field, and the Earth is given preeminence above all else, and life will be beautiful, right? So they have to use treachery and deception. Same thing if they were like, hey guys, we actually are the ones that pulled off 9/11, and we are now going to institute a police state and a surveillance state, the likes that the world has never seen. We are going to be invading foreign countries, even more so than before, and you are going to pay for all of it, right? No, instead they have to say, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, they destroyed, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. I think I've made my point. The point is that the truth is natural. Deception is unnatural. And in order for the powers that be to carry out their agenda, they have to utilize deception. But there's problems because the people are smart, people are light for the most part, and they can see through all of that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about the prospects for liberty, because it's the natural default state. Love, harmony, symbiosis, and just beauty in the world. And just, what's the word? There's a randomness to freedom, right? Spontaneous order is the default. So when you try to take away from that, there's problems that people can see through it. And then the other reason why I'm optimistic for the prospects for liberty, I'm going to borrow from Murray Rothbard. He wrote this awesome essay called Left, Right, and the Prospects for Liberty. It was in a journal called Left and Right, which was a partnership. I think Carl Hess was a part of it, but it was a journal that tried to bridge the gap between libertarians and new left thinkers and this whole classical liberal phenomenon. In the essay, he goes through history, and he does a proper reorientation of the left-right paradigm, utilizing and saying that it came about with the positions of the political ideologies in the General Assembly before the French Revolution. On the left sat the radicals, the classical liberals. They wanted to overthrow the existing order of feudalism, serfdom, and despair. They wanted higher mobility, a higher standard of living for the masses, more free markets away from the mercantilism, more towards freed markets. And these were the original classical liberal ideals. And on the right sat the conservatives, the radicals on the left, conservatives on the right, who sought to preserve and conserve the status quo of divine right of kings, merchant class, aristocrats that had control, and everyone else existed for the benefit of that class of parasites. And so first he reorients that. Then he makes the case for optimism about the prospects for liberty in the future, left, right, and the prospects for liberty. And he says, even though, and this was written in like the 70s or the 80s, even though one might think that because of all the control and tyranny that we already have in the world, and of course I'm paraphrasing, that the prospects for liberty seem dark and bleak. Well, when we have this proper reorientation of left and right, and when we examine how things used to be, it wasn't very long ago, a couple hundred years, 300 years especially, where there was total serfdom, total despair, no vision of what freedom could even look like. You had the divine right of kings. If you spoke out against the government, against the king, against the church, you'd be quartered. They'd chop your head off, put it on a giant stake, and put it in the town square for everyone to see, so they would be fearful of speaking out. There was no self-determination. A significant portion of the population lived in feudalism. They were serfs. They were enslaved. They were slaves. That wasn't that long ago. And when you think about that, where we are now, right? Now, mind you, we still have that in certain parts of the country, in communist countries, in China, in North Korea, in some African tyrannies, in some Middle Eastern tyrannies, right? We have a different brand, a different blend, different form of tyranny in the United States. And now there's an old quote that say, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And I believe that wholeheartedly. One of the problems with having relative freedom, this is something that Stefan Molyneux, him and Jones, they went far right. It's like, oh man, you actually had some good stuff to say. I mean, that doesn't discount some of the good stuff they say nowadays, but a lot of it's really bad. Stefan Molyneux had pointed this great thing out, that the relative freedom that we have, the relative economic freedom that we've had in the United States, coupled with a coercive tax scheme, especially the income tax, has created an environment where we've been able to have economic prosperity and great financial circumstances. But because of that, the state has been able to grow to the size and scope that the United States empire is today. So that's really problematic. But another thing that Murray Rothbard points out is that now that people have had a taste of freedom, they're not going to want to go back to the hardcore tyranny, right? And one of the interesting things is what we want as liberty-loving human beings is a radical departure from the status quo, from the way that things used to be. This is why, even though libertarians have historically coalesced with conservatives, think of the Ron Paul revolution, for example, and there's paleo conservatives and there's conservative Republicans that are helping to push back against the lockdowns, for example. The name conservative, it's wanting to conserve the status quo, the old order, which in this case is the United States constitutional republic. Even though it was never a republic, there was never total respect of individual liberty. Not to mention women couldn't vote. African Americans were slaves, early on. A very small number of people actually had a say in the early government of 1789. Benjamin Tucker points this out and estimates that only 10% of the people had a say in how they were to be governed early on. The conservatives want to go back to that. The Trump folks want to go back to some fantasy that there was this great freedom and that everyone enjoyed, when in reality that wasn't the case. What the radicals want to do is have a radical departure from that institution in itself. The state. We want to create something new. We want to go forward to something beautiful. And now here's the ironic part. I mentioned earlier Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, Agenda 30. The powers that be, the technocrats, they try to leverage this veneer of progressivism and liberalism, but in reality, what they seek to do as well is return to the old order of feudalism and despair. And even the Global Biodiversity Assessment, they say that if we are to maintain, this is paraphrasing, but this isn't the Global Biodiversity Assessment, which again is the blueprint for Agenda 21. Now it's Agenda 2030. Agenda 2021 was the agenda for the 21st century. It was a document that most of the world's nations, especially in the West, signed on to at the 1992 Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit in Brazil. George H.W. Bush was the president at the time. He signed on to it. And it wasn't necessarily like a U.S. Senate treaty kind of thing. It was just like, yeah, we're going to sign on to it. And of course, Agenda 21 is really being utilized through the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, where they circumvent the national government, which oftentimes puts up resistance, and instead do an end run around the law, around the legal aspects, around Congress passing a law, and go straight to local governments like they have here in the city of Austin and all the liberal big cities especially. But what Agenda 21 aims to do isn't this new way of living. No, it's a return to the old order. And as I was going to say, in the global biodiversity assessment, I go off on these tangents. It's like stream of consciousness just flowing with it, so bear with me. In the global biodiversity assessment, they say if we're going to maintain the current standard of living that we have today, industrialized nations, for example, then an optimal population size would be somewhere around 1 billion. I don't know the exact number, but it's around 1 billion, which is a far cry from 6.5 billion or whatever it is today. If we are to maintain this current level of population, then we would need to see a dramatic reduction in the standard of living. And they even say back to the level of feudalism. They either say feudalism or serfdom. In the Global Biodiversity Assessment, a document that was put out by the United Nations as part of Agenda 21. So that's not some beautiful place forward. No, that's a return to the old order, to the old paradigm. And in reality, when you examine the United States of America and the United States Constitution, yes, we did away with the divine right of kings. However, on that note, I'd like to point out that almost every single president that's ever been elected in this country has royal blood, right? And the Anglo-American establishment and the royal bloodlines are still in power today, especially through their central banking institutions. But even that institution, while it had this liberal, classical liberal, Thomas Jefferson, John Locke ideals applied to it, the United States government, it still was an example of the old order, the old conservative status quo way of doing things, where a small group of people have control over a large portion of the population. And even though there was a little bit more self-determination in the form of voting, which is all fraud and BS, and again, it gives you that veneer, that false image of self-determination. Somebody said if voting was so effective, it would be considered illegal, right? It's still the status quo of a monopoly on coercion, where a small group of people has control over that institution, carries forward their plans for the rest of society, and everyone else is coerced into participating whether they like it or not. So what I would like to see, and what I see happening now, and what I want to encourage you who's watching to take it upon yourself to carry this banner, to engage in activism of this vein, is if we want to see more freedom, if we want to have the free society that we all deserve as free human beings with free will, then we need to create that free society. We need to build and develop those institutions. And now is a better time than ever. This is how we can compound the optimism, right? People are like, whoa, shit is really effed up bad right now. Whether it's police brutality, which is being exposed in the light of day, and then there's all this like co-option, communist stuff, and like, it's not just this natural pure movement. There's stuff going on, but there is natural pure stuff going on as well. People are seeing that and fed up and like, this isn't working. People are seeing the COVID stuff that's taking place and the response, and whether so there's people that are like, most of the people that are probably watching this, and they're like, yeah, it's a fraud. Some people think it's a hoax. I don't think it's a hoax. I think there's actually a virus, but I do think there's fraud being perpetrated in response to it, and it's being overhyped. So people are seeing that. But even the people that are genuinely concerned about COVID, some of them rightfully so, right? People have lost loved ones, but you never know what the hell's going on. So the people that are fed up with COVID and see that it's bullshit, they are fed up and disillusioned and looking for answers. And the people that are concerned with COVID are seeing that the public health institutions, Trump, obviously, if it's a liberal, they're going to blame it all on Trump. But even the Democrat run, like Governor Cuomo is sending, and like 5 other Democrats in Democrat states, sending COVID sick patients to nursing homes. That's in large part, those actions were responsible for a significant portion of the overall deaths in the United States. So the critical thinkers, people that are thinking outside the box, that question COVID, are fed up looking for answers, as are the people that are a little more normies. They're looking for answers. They're fed up, as are the Black Lives Matter seeking answers for racial injustice. They're correctly seeing, and people could debate about this, they're correctly seeing that there is institutionalized racism in municipal police departments. Everyone is like, wow, shit is really bad. So this is another reason, a third reason why I'm really optimistic about the prospects for liberty, because now we forward-thinking freedom lovers The time is ours. The time is ours to seize and present a new opportunity, a alternative way of doing things that isn't based on top-down hierarchy, control, coercion, feudalism, neo-feudalism. It's not any of that. Institutional racism. It's none of that. We have the opportunity to present a new paradigm on how we can move forward socially as human beings, one that is based on mutually beneficial voluntary association. I love that expression as a way to describe anarchism or freedom or free society. We don't have institutions that are based on coercion, or the fact that you were born into a certain geographic area means that you are subject to those laws. No, we have institutions that are voluntary. You choose to participate and you can choose not to participate. They're voluntary and they're mutually beneficial. In many ways, a rational actor wouldn't engage voluntarily in an institution, organization, or relationship unless it was mutually beneficial. Even people that are volunteering and doing charitable activity, they still get positive feelings because of that. So that's mutually beneficial in that regard. So what we have the opportunity to do is to spread the idea of mutually beneficial voluntary association, fraternal groups, not skull and bones secret societies, right? Fraternal groups, religious organizations, mutual aid groups, freedom cells, social compacts. You know, my step-grandfather told me of a fraternal organization that they had here in East Austin way back in the day. They were Mexicanos, Latinos, and there was economic problems, and they just started organizing themselves and helping folks that were in need and providing a little boost when someone couldn't make rent, helping with food whenever the old lady lost her old man and she didn't know how to live with herself. That is what things need to be like. We need to shift away from the centralized way of doing things, whether it was feudalism, whether it's the British Royal Crown, whether it's communist China, or whether it's the United States of America. We need to shift away from the centralization and welcome in a new era of decentralization in the institutions, in social organization, in food production, right? Permaculture, networks of local farms growing organic food, trading amongst themselves. The farm down the road supplying the feed for the chickens in your backyard. Decentralizing the financial game away from the central banks, which have the ability to create money and credit out of thin air, which in large part has financed every foreign war of aggression in the past 100 years in this country, even going back before that. Decentralize that, move away from that towards decentralized cryptocurrencies. And it doesn't even have to be cryptocurrencies. It could be people trading silver. It could be local labor notes. It can be whatever the hell fits the community that's doing it. It's not a top-down. It's not my way or the highway. It's decentralized. It's whatever works best for you. One size does not fit all, and one size fits all government is one of the reasons why there's so much division amongst the human beings alive today. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so I invite you, if you're watching this video, to join in me in being a optimistic, liberty-loving, happy-go-lucky guy who isn't ignorant or naive at what's taking place. No, we're very well aware and very well informed. But we choose to focus our energy not on the problem, on the state, on the latest conspiracy. No, we choose to focus our energy on the beauty that's taking place in the world, in the mass uprisings that are taking place, in the development, proliferation, and creation of alternative decentralized institutions, mutually beneficial voluntary associations that we all know are going to rise up and replace the state as a means of organizing society. Because nowadays people are connected, people are talking. We no longer have one controlled institution of mass media, mass manipulation, mass propaganda, mass social engineering. No, we have the alternative media. We have people thinking outside the box, thinking critically. And when they are presented, a lot of people don't know, when they're presented with the possibility of doing things differently, And that's the beauty of, there's different ways to teach people, right? You can write an essay. You can do a video like I'm doing right now. But one of the best ways to teach people and educate people is to show them, is to say, hey, look what we're doing over here. I know we've been talking about anarchy and voluntarism for a long time, and I know it sounds far-fetched because it's just not what you're used to, and chances are you went to a public school where you're indoctrinated to believe that the state is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. But look what we're doing over here. We've organized over 3,500 people all across the globe that are building out smaller networks in their area so they can perform mutual aid, mutual defense, work together on common goals, grow food together, engage in natural health practices together, raise their children together to be young, free, sovereign, free-spirited, peaceful people. We can show them that's what's happening over at freedomcells.org. Just check out the member map. We can show people, because people don't know there's an alternative out there. And as more and more people become aware that there's this cool stuff going on with decentralized cryptocurrencies and farm-to-table food production systems and agri-hoods and intentional communities and eco-villages that are networked together. There's this radical social organization called Freedom Cells. People are protecting themselves, defending themselves, providing for one another without coercion, without treachery, without the New World Order. When people begin to realize that, and we're all smiling, right? We're not dark and weird and calling people sheeple and COVID-idiots. We're not turning people away from what we have to offer by being assholes, frankly. Instead, we're playing up the positive aspects of what we have to offer the world right now, which is peace and freedom and hope for something better, because shit's really fucked up. I got 2 kids. I don't want them to inherit the world that I've grown up in. They're not going to. Things are going to be different because we're actively building. And so I invite you to redouble your efforts to shift your mindset away from one of pessimistic, bleak outlooks when it comes to the future prospects of liberty, and one towards positivity, because one, it's the natural state of how we are as human beings. It's the natural state of life. We have our natural free will. Truth is the natural state. Truth is the default. The powers that be are having to deviate away from that in order to carry out their agenda. The lies are being exposed, however, and people see through it. They're not buying it. A lot of people are. The masses are, in large part, but the masses never changed the course of history. It's the remnant on the outskirts of society. It's those people that are lighting brush fires of liberty in the minds of men and women, waking them up. So I'm positive because of that. The natural state is freedom, and freedom always wins in the end. I'm positive because when you think about it, just a few hundred years ago, the whole world was total slavery, serfdom, feudalism, divine right of kings. And if you spoke out against the government, you had your head cut off, put on a giant stake, and shown in the town square for everyone to see. And I'm positive because we have an opportunity like we've never seen before. The state is failing and crumbling all around us, and now is our opportunity to seize the moment and show people that there is another way, a better way to do things based on peace and mutually beneficial voluntary association in a decentralized way, not one size fits all, top down, coercive, hierarchical control of the masses by a small group of people. So there you have it, folks. Join me. Things are looking good. We got this. We can do this. If you want to point people to freedomcells.org, if you want to point people to your own thing, if you want to get out and start networking, organizing, doing cryptocurrencies, doing local barter networks, mutual aid networks, checking on each other, sharing your herb garden with your neighbor, that's what it's all about. And we can do this. We can turn the tide. This is John Bush, Live Free Now. LiveFreeNow.show. I invite you to subscribe to my email newsletter, to follow me on Stitcher, on iTunes, on Google Podcasts. Together, we're going to create the free society that we all deserve. The time is now.